Hi everybody, welcome to Dulcimerica. My name is Bing Futch and I'm here in Hanover, Pennsylvania camping at Chord State Park where it is about to rain. So I'm trying to knock out some episodes here while on the road, on tour. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today I am, by request, going to do a little bit of work on the modes and also talk about DAA tuning and why more people aren't using it. But before I get into that, I want to give a big shout out to one of my patrons on Patreon, Deborah Vasquez. Deborah, man, oh man, what a blast it has been getting to know you, and it has been so much fun, whether it be up in Everett, Michigan, or down in Homosassa, Florida. We've had some great times, but I really do appreciate your friendship, your encouragement, and I appreciate you being a patron, and telling other people that you're a patron, because that means a lot when you hear it from somebody else. It has been an amazing journey, and I'm looking forward to more fun in various places where we meet up. And also, it's always nice to see you on Facebook and other places. Thank you, Deborah, very much for being one of my patrons. One of many now. It's happening a whole bunch, folks, out there. And if you're wondering what this Patreon thing is all about, it's a way for people to support the artists that they really enjoy. And basically, with my patrons, basically, you get $5 per month to get you in. It gets you everything I've ever produced, self-published wise. It also gets you immediate access to everything I'm going to produce. All new music, all new tablature, all new videos, weeks before anybody else gets them. It gives you a behind-the-scenes glimpse at what it's like on a day-to-day existence as I'm creating music, video, and a whole lot more. Taking you on the road, doing all kinds of stuff. It's been a great time, and I've had a great time getting to know all of the patrons that are part of this wonderful community of love that have become a part of my art. If you'd like to check it out for yourself, you can go right down here to the link. There will be some links popping up here as well. It's patreon.com/BingFutch. Check out the videos, look at the incentives, and also download some free goodies for yourself in the open house section. Get an idea of how it all works out and think about whether or not you'd like to become part of the art. Deborah Vasquez, thank you very much for being part of my art. All right, today we are going to be working on the modes. The modes are kind of a mystery to a lot of people because we already play a really interesting instrument in that it is basically, before we start adding frets to it, it is a modal instrument. Now, what exactly is a mode? Well, let me start off by saying that most music these days in the Western music civilization uses a chromatic scale. My Fullcraft double neck Dulcimer here has got two different fretboards, and the fretboard right here is fully chromatic. So starting with D, going all the way up to the octave, you'll hear 13 notes. 12 notes that are different, and the 13th note will be the octave of D. That's a chromatic scale. Out of that chromatic scale, we can play a number of shorter scales called diatonic scales. These are 7-note scales that all have a particular key. That key is what gives them the root note, the accidentals, the notes that are sharp or flat, and gives each single key its very different flavor. All the keys sound a little bit different. If you play a song in the key of D and then play it in G, the relative distance between the notes, the intervals, will be the same, but there will be a little bit of a different sound because of those keys. All of the notes that we play, all of the pitches, all of the tones that we play have different vibrating frequencies, and those frequencies have a lot of scientific things that happen to the air, to everything around us, and to ourselves as well. So that's another study altogether. I won't get deep into that, but suffice it to say that a chromatic scale is 12 half steps. These are all half steps. They're all tiny frets moving together here. When you get to the diatonic fretboard, you start seeing gaps in this sequence. Wide open space, wide open space, wide open space. And I've got extra frets on this Dulcimer, the 1.5, the 6.5. It's non-standard. It's not a truly modal Dulcimer. But you can still see these empty spaces here. That is where a fret has been removed. So I've got 3 notes missing from this fretboard. If you're playing a standard Dulcimer, and by standard I mean one with a 6.5 fret nowadays, the new standard, you're going to have 4 notes. 4 spaces, but 4 notes that had been removed. If this were a truly modal Dulcimer, you would not have the 6.5 fret. So you would actually have 5 notes before you were fully chromatic. So you can see why a lot of people enjoy the mountain Dulcimer, because it is very easy to play when all of those notes that you have to consider when you're playing in different keys, they're all gone. Everything you need for the key is right there. The problem with that is that switching keys becomes very difficult. In fact, there is an old story that whenever a dulcimer player sat down at a jam with other people, everybody would pick up their instruments and walk away and go someplace else. Why is that? Because the dulcimer player couldn't play in any key, and whenever they said, let's go play in G, the dulcimer player had to retune for everything. This is part of the modal nature I'm getting flown upon here. I didn't put my off on. A lot of creatures that you can't see right down here. So, so what's happening here is we are tuning into these different tunings that we know: DAD, DAA, DAC, DAG, DAB flat, DAE. All of these tunings are as a result of us tuning into different modes for the mountain dulcimer's very unusual diatonic scale. The scale which begins at the 3rd fret. Out of the chromatic scale, they're all half steps. A diatonic scale has 5 whole steps and 2 half steps for a total of 7 notes. And that sequence goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. If you were to do that with a chromatic scale, no matter where you started, if you take 2 half steps and put them together, you've got a whole step. So if I follow that pattern, starting arbitrarily, let's start here. So I'm going to go like this: whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And there you have the major scale. There's a different pattern of whole steps and half steps for the minor scale: whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. Will get you a minor scale. So you've got major and minor scales, but you've got numbers of different types of minor scales, as we're about to discover by looking at the modes. The modes were created by the Greeks way back in the day, and modes were used to compose a lot of liturgical music for the church in the 10th century under Constantine. The modes still exist, but we really don't use them a whole bunch because we've got the chromatic scale and we've got different keys. But the modal situation is very interesting. It starts off, and there are 7 modern modes that we use today. It starts off with what we call the Ionian mode, and that is the template for what we now call the major scale. It starts from the 3rd fret on the mountain dulcimer and goes all the way to the 10th fret, not using the 6.5 fret. And here's the key: whenever you are using modes on the mountain dulcimer, you don't want to use any extra frets. Just use the frets that already exist, except for the 6.5. If I start from 3 and go to 10 and avoid the 6.5 and my 8.5, you will get a major scale. Now what we're going to do is, this is different from a key. A key takes its cue from the key signature, what flats and what sharps there are going on, and then the root note. The mode takes its key from a starting point inside of that scale. If that makes sense, I'll try and make sense for you. Remember that scale I just showed you, the diatonic, the major scale? We have all of our whole steps and half steps all uniform there to create the major scale. But if I start from the 4th fret instead of the 3rd fret and go to the 11th fret instead of the 10th fret, now the interval order has changed, and what will result will be the Dorian mode, and it is a minor scale. It sounds like this. Just by moving our position inside of the scale 1 note up, we now reach the Dorian mode. The Dorian mode is like the major scale, except for notes 3 and 7 are flattened. So we have a Dorian minor, not quite a minor scale because we need notes 3, 6, and 7 for it to be a minor scale. Now let's start from the 3rd note of the scale. Let's start right there at the 5th fret. And here is our Phrygian mode, also a minor mode, with flats 2, 3, 6, and 7. That's sometimes called the Latin mode because of the way those notes sound when played together. Starting from the 6th fret, we've got the Lydian mode. The Lydian mode is a major mode, only the 4th note is raised up a half step. It sounds a little unusual. Sounds like this. The Mixolydian mode should sound familiar to you because a lot of folks think that's what we're playing when we're in DAD tuning. But if you're using the 6.5 fret, we're actually not playing in true Mixolydian mode because the Mixolydian mode has a flat 7th note. Now, I could start that from the 7th fret because we're moving our way up the scale, but we also know the 7th fret is the octave to open. So I can play open and make sure I don't use the 6.5 fret. And here is our next major scale, the major mode rather, the Mixolydian mode. That 7th note is flattened, and we use that. Mixolydian tunes include Old Joe Clark and Down the River I Go, Uncle Joe. A lot of the Joe tunes are Mixolydian for some reason. That flatted 7th and also a chord based off of that flatted 7th would be C major. It sounds unusual to us because we're so used to hearing C sharp in our scale and not using C natural. So there is the Mixolydian mode the way it was originally intended. Here's a bit of news for you, or a bit of history and trivia. It's because of the DAD setup. It is a symmetrical tuning. We've got a D, A, and D. We can flip our chords over. We can continue scales across the strings. You can see why earlier Dulcimer players were loving this. The problem was you couldn't play the major scale with the drones matching. So it was Howie Mitchell who came up with the idea of installing the 6.5 fret so we could do this. Raise that 7th note, and then have our major scales. That's why we have a 6.5 fret. Now we're going to keep moving along. First fret is going to be the Aeolian mode, our next minor mode. This is also the template for what's known as the natural minor scale. It's going to have a flat 3, 6, and 7. And we end up with the 7th mode, and that is the Locrian mode. It is really a theoretical mode. It is used for composing sometimes, but it sounds really, really odd. Every single note in this mode is flat except for the first note and the 4th note. And so, as you can imagine, it draws some cringes sometimes when you listen to it. Sounds spooky, but it can be used for all kinds of cool stuff. You'll find that now our journey has brought us right back to where we started from at the 3rd fret with the first mode, the Ionian mode, the major scale. So here's how this works. The mode positions start from each one of these locations on the mountain dulcimer. What we want to do is, if we want to play in the key of D in those modes, we want to retune the melody string so that D begins where that scale begins, where that mode begins. So if we wanted to tune to the Ionian mode, we would tune D, A, and the melody string would be tuned to A. Because if you tune the melody string down to A, that will put D there at the 3rd fret. And now you'll have a D major scale, and all of your drones will match. If you wanted to tune into Dorian mode D, you would tune to DAG. DAG would put D at the 4th fret instead of the 3rd fret, and you could then play and get all your drones correct and play lovely things like Scarborough Affair and other tunes that have that lovely minor, but not intensely minor sound to them. It's really interesting. I would love to dig down deep into it, but we'll be here all day, and I'm not sure how the batteries are holding on all this stuff. So, let's talk about DAA. Why aren't more people tuning into DAA? I don't know. Some folks see it as a West Coast thing. A lot of folks on the West Coast play DAA. I know there are some groups in Mississippi that love to play in DAA, but a lot of folks seem to think that DAA is a simplified, easy-going, kind of a beginner's way of playing, and DAD is more sophisticated. I don't agree with that. I think DAA is not only as sophisticated and as intense as DAD can be, it's also a lot better sounding. I know. But here's what we're talking about. Close voicing. The notes when you're tuned in DAA are nice and close together. That means that your chords have a rich fabric going on. DAD has got a big wide octave spread in most of its chords, and sometimes the chords are very indistinct, like an E minor 3-4-5. Doesn't sound nearly as solid as a 1-1-3 E minor. And that's because of the voicing. That's because of the intervals between those notes. So DAA gives you a lot better voicing in that term, and some of the chord shapes I think are a lot easier to play. How do you tune in the DAA? We're just going to tune that melody string the same way as the middle string. Bring it on down to A. There we have DAA. Now I've got a 13 gauge string on the melody string, and because it is, I chose that because of the high tension required for D. Now that I'm gone down to A, it's going to be a little flat, or sorry, it's going to go a little sharp if I play it, because it really doesn't have a lot of tension going on. So if you want to hang out in DAA, it's a really good idea to get a tougher gauge in there, like a 15 or a 16 even, to take up that tension and make sure your intonation doesn't go south. Sometimes I actually detune a little bit so that when I do fret, everything sounds good, but then you have to watch out for your open drone. I'm just opening up a big can of worms here, ain't I? Okay, so now we're in DAA tuning. Let's show you some chord shapes. First of all, we'll show you the 1, 4, 5 chords. These are chords based off the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale. You know these 3 chords, you can play in any jam. D, G, and A are those chords, starting off with, from the bass string, the numbers I'm calling right now, 203. That's D major, 203. I'm using index finger and thumb. Slide that down to 102. That's A. Bring it back up to 203. That's D. Now we'll do a T-shaped chord. That's going to be a 3-1-3. Move the index finger up, leave the thumb where it is, drop the ring finger or pinky down on the 1st fret on the middle string, and now you have a G major chord. And you can see how easy it is to move back and forth between these 3 chords. Those are all the chords you need for any jam. Now, let's move any further now. Let's show you some of the other chord shapes. Those are the easy chord shapes. We'll start off with the A triangle chord. 4, 3, 5 is what I'm playing. 4, 3, and 5. You'll notice that the 2 strings, melody and middle, are tuned the same. Why is it important to make sure that the melody string gets the thumb, as opposed to doing it like this with the thumb on the middle string? Because your thumb is going to be what you use for soloing when you're holding these chord shapes down. So it's important to have that thumb there on the melody string so that you can carry on your soloing, unless you want to solo on the middle string, but they're the same string, so make it easy on yourself by all means. So 4, 3, 5. With this particular chord, whatever you are playing on the middle string is going to be the root of the chord. So if you know, for example, that right under your ring finger at the 3rd fret middle string is a D, then you know that this is a D major. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to take these 2 fingers and move them up this way. By moving them up this way, we are extending the triangle, so we call this the extended triangle. And whatever you are playing on the melody string is going to be the root of that chord. So now that we've changed our tuning on the melody string to A, we know that G is there at the 6th fret. So this is a G major chord. So that's the triangle and the extended triangle. And then we have the T shape, and the T shape we already played, 3-1-3. The T shape is whatever you're playing on the bass string is going to give you the root of your chord. In this case, we've got G on the bass string at the 3rd fret, and then we've got our G major chord. Go back to your 5-3-6 chord. 5-3-6. G major, 3-1-3. I always like to play a little bit of musical concentration to make sure that I understand that G lives here, G lives here, D lives here, D lives here. And after a while you get to form a nice aural picture and a mental picture and a visual picture of where everything lives on your fretboard. So those 3 chord shapes again, the T shape, 3-1-3 in this case for G major. This is a movable shape. Sometimes it'll give you major chords, sometimes it'll give you minor chords. Make sure you listen to the nature of the chord, the character of the chord, before you name it officially. For example, right here I'm playing B on the bass string. That's a 5-3-5 chord. That sounds to me like a minor chord. B is the root, B minor would be 5-3-5. Compare that with 2-1-3. That's a triangle chord, where the root is on the middle string. Middle string, right there at the first fret, is B. There's our B minor in a triangle chord. These are all movable forms. And our extended triangle, in this case 5-3-6, the root's on the melody string. There we have G at the 6th fret. And these live all over the place as well. There's a B right there on the melody string. That's 4-3-4-2, 4-2-5. That's a B minor. Compare that with, and this. Again, wanting to learn where all those chords are located, and that's the source that I use. So you've got those 3 chord shapes. You've got these simple shapes down here for your G major. D major, sorry, D major, A major, and G major, all below the 3rd fret. And that is part of the mystery of uncorking what is DAA tuning. There's a lot more to it, and one of these days I hope you'll join me for another episode or even a live workshop somewhere as we get down deeper into the modes on the mountain dulcimer. Thank you guys very much for tuning in and for choosing the mountain dulcimer as your preferred method of flying wherever you may go. Until next time, my friends, this is Bing Futch saying, y'all be good to each other out there and play on.